So for the past week or so, I've been playing XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. This is a really good expansion. In fact, it's one of the best expansions I think I've ever played for any video game, and that's really good to hear. I love XCOM 2. I think it's a fantastic game. Lots of people don't like it because it's super RNG-like, you know, things happen randomly that you have no control over. I think it's fine. I think it's hilarious. I'm the type of person who can, frankly, just deal with things like that. Some people can't. That's totally cool. But XCOM 2 was one of my favorite games of last year. In fact, it probably would have gotten the #1 spot in my countdown, which I gave to Overwatch, but the only reason Overwatch really got that was because it had less bugs and glitches than XCOM 2 Vanilla did, because that game had a lot of them. And I'm very happy to say that War of the Chosen manages to fix most of them. The game runs buttery smooth now, when before it had a lot of frame rates and dips and other stuff that really impacted performance negatively if you were laying down suppression, for instance. But this version of it, in all but the most extreme circumstances, it runs super well. I had one frame dip the other day, and that was because I was playing on a map with 20 or 30 enemies on the screen, and they were all trying to move at once. That was the only time that ever really happened, so that's really good to hear. And I know frame rates don't really matter as much in a turn-based game, but they still make it less aesthetically pleasing, and in a game like XCOM, which is very cinematic with everything, it does kind of hamper your experience a bit, and it can make you enjoy the game less. So thankfully, this is a far superior version of XCOM 2 performance-wise. However, there is a bit of an issue with that, and this is going to affect people who haven't picked up the expansion yet, or people who are interested in the series and haven't tried it, because if you buy the vanilla version of XCOM 2 right now, you're going to get a lot of performance problems still, because they didn't carry over the updates and the patches and the fixes into the vanilla game, and they said that was because they did a bunch of reworking to the engine and the fundamentals, so they couldn't really put it over into the vanilla game without putting a lot of content from the expansion into it. Now, to an extent, I understand that, but at the same time, if you're going to improve performance in an expansion, even if you can't improve the performance in the vanilla to the same extent, they should still be releasing patches so that people have the option to, you know, play your game a little bit smoother, a little bit better, because as it stands, there's still a bunch of performance issues with the vanilla version of the game. That's not really acceptable. The game's been out for over a year. I do expect more patches to smooth that stuff out, because it does negatively impact your enjoyment of the experience. So I think that's kind of dumb, and I think they should be definitely looking into that and trying to fix it, because if not, that's really negative for consumers, and I don't agree with it one little bit. Alright, so that being said, War of the Chosen is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it's one of my favorite expansions I think I've ever played. It takes the XCOM 2 experience and it enhances it to a degree that it almost feels like a sequel. Like, it truly does feel like you're playing a different game, albeit with the same storyline, but even that has been updated to be a lot more cinematic, have a bit more driving force behind it, and really get you immersed in the world a whole lot more. And the way they do that is by introducing, well, the Chosen, the big boss baddies that show up to try to disrupt your plans on missions and offer a bit more variety and stuff like that to your experience, and they do a fantastic job. It's very obvious that they took a couple cues from the Nemesis system from Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, which I still think is one of the best innovations in video games in the last few years, and I'm very disappointed that other games haven't started using it more, because the Nemesis system, if you're not aware, basically gives boss enemies or certain characters in games that you're fighting against different traits and stuff. They can be randomized. Now, they're not as randomized in this one. The Chosen might get the same traits every single playthrough, but at least they're kind of advancing and gaining in skill, and it gives you a bit of a different experience as you fight them throughout the game, because you will be fighting the same ones over and over again. There's 3 of them, but they will get more powerful, get new abilities, get new weaknesses and strengths that you can exploit. So it really makes fighting the Chosen very interesting, because they kind of just pop into random missions and really cause you a lot of havoc. They'll show up randomly and try to basically take control of your soldiers, get information from them, and if they get enough of it, then they can start, like, hunting down your forces, and their entire goal is to capture you, the commander, because if you played XCOM 2, you know that the aliens kind of want to get him back. That's not a spoiler, that's in the first cutscene of the entire game. And they've got a couple really cool abilities, you know, like I said, they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. They've got all these really interesting, customized abilities that they can use to disrupt and deal damage to you. They don't really try to kill your forces outright usually. What they're mostly there to do is disorient and stun your soldiers so they can either take them captive or they can like just get more information from them. Then they teleport out. They're not like some unstoppable force of death. They're more just there to thwart your plans and kind of like forward their own to an extent. Their personalities were also very fleshed out, and that was really welcome in this game because I feel like the original story for the game, while it was serviceable, it was never really the focus. The focus was the gameplay itself. But this one kind of adds in some really cool wrinkles to the storyline because these alien Chosens, they're basically trying to capture you first. They're in competition with each other, and they've each got their own personalities and quips and quotes that they'll tell you when you're either in-game or in the overlay, scanning stuff and the like. And having those little story elements in the game, it really does help. You know, it makes you feel more invested in not only them as antagonists, but your own characters as well, because they'll constantly be taunting you. If they get one of your soldiers or something like that, then they'll be basically saying like, oh, you're a terrible commander and you should be, you know, disbarred, and how does it feel to know that you suck? Obviously, it's a bit more eloquent than that, but you kind of get the picture. What it really does is it enhances the entire story. It's kind of like a nice foil to everything to really tie everything up in a nice little bow and make the gameplay feel a lot more succinct. So 3 new classes have also been included in the game for you to utilize. You have the Reapers, the Skirmishers, and the Templars. Each one of them is fairly unique, doesn't really do a whole lot of stuff that you see in the base classes in the game. They would be considered probably higher-end classes based on the abilities they have. So, say the Skirmishers have the ability to grapple an enemy with like a grappling hook, pull them in, then deliver like a melee strike so you can either kill them outright or basically expose them for the rest of your team to fire upon. And stuff like that. The Reapers specialize in being concealed and not being seen by enemies, and then the Templars are basically giant laser sword wielding badasses, and that's awesome. They've all got some really cool abilities that you can unlock, and they've got some very outside of the box stuff that I'm still loving to play around with. I was playing earlier, and there's an entire squad that was kind of just up against a forklift, and I ended up using the Reaper's ability to basically blow up any explodable object and not be revealed. But you can also upgrade it so it does like double damage and radius, so I ended up taking out the entire squad at once, and I had no idea it would do that. I blew up like half a building, but it's stuff like that that I love seeing in a game like this, where you're like, oh, that's really cool. That's not going to happen every mission, but when cool little things like that do happen, your enjoyment, your experience, and your attachment to the soldiers and the missions, it skyrockets, and that's fantastic. And 3 new classes is like a 75% increase in the amount of classes that were available in the base game anyways, so that's really awesome. That is something that I would expect out of like a sequel rather than necessarily an expansion. Now, aside from the Chosen, on the alien side, there are a bunch of new enemies as well. There's things like the Advent Priests that use psionic abilities that show up way earlier in the game, because in the vanilla version, you never really dealt with psionics, aside from the sectoids, which did very limited versions of it until later on. So seeing them pop up and seeing a couple other new enemy types and variants is really welcome. There is enough there where every now and then something new pops up, and I'm still saying like, oh, I had no idea that existed, that's terrifying. So you will be seeing at least 4 to 6 new enemy types. I don't even think I've seen them all yet, and I've done a couple playthroughs, so that'll be kind of interesting to explore further. And of course, on top of that as well, like I mentioned earlier, there are the Lost, which are some really cool zombie-esque husk things that you find in some missions. They're not everywhere, they're in very specific areas, and they're usually a part of what's called sit reps, which is like, now when you go on missions, there can be special circumstances under that mission where it's like, oh, you'll have a bunch of zombies to deal with that'll attack both sides, the aliens and your forces as well. Or it'll be stuff like your squad can enter concealment once per mission, or there'll be like specific enemy types, like you'll only be fighting faceless or berserkers on specific missions and stuff, so you have to plan around it accordingly. It offers, again, more variation to the levels and the game, and I love that. So yeah, when you're fighting the Lost, you'll basically be running around through a city, and then they'll be appearing when you do things like loud explosions. If you blow up a car, then they'll probably attract a bunch of them, so you have to be a little bit quieter. Try to kind of shoot every enemy instead of blowing them up, which I know is very tempting to do in the early game, but you can get overrun by them, and it adds a little extra layer to some of the missions, which is really nice to see. The missions as well have been expanded. There's new maps and new types of maps as well. You can be fighting underground or in abandoned cities now. They've overhauled some of the stuff like mission timers and things on some of the missions, so back in the vanilla version, you'd be trying to destroy a relay or something. You'd have 8 to 10 turns to do so. In this one, they give you less turns initially, but littered around the map now are these tiny little relays that you can blow up or destroy, and that'll give you an extra turn. So it's like a little bit of an extra layer of strategy to it, and again, it's more engaging content, I feel, and I really do feel like they have enhanced the game and the experience. I really feel like I can't stress enough that the amount of content that's offered in this expansion almost feels like a new game. They could have turned this into a full new game, but they decided to go and do an expansion instead. Now, that being said, it's an expensive expansion, you know, 40 to 50 bucks depending on where you live, but in my opinion, it is worth it, and I do think this is the best XCOM experience that I've personally played through. Now, I've only played from XCOM Enemy Unknown up until this expansion, so, you know, you can call me a new person on the block if you want to, but I think this is the best new version of XCOM so far. Now, the question is, should you pick this up? Well, I think it's kind of like a twofold question here. So, if you played the first version of XCOM 2 and you really liked it, I think you're going to only enjoy this one more because it adds, like I said, way more layers to the content. It has great performance increases and everything is more stable. So, I think that you're going to get hours of enjoyment out of this, and it's going to feel like a very familiar yet enhanced experience. However, I think people who were, say, interested in XCOM 2 but never picked it up should probably wait until this goes either on sale or it kind of ends up in a bundle with the vanilla version of XCOM 2. Because the problem I'm seeing right now is that if you buy XCOM 2 for, say, $40 or whatever it costs right now, then you have to buy this one separately for another $40 to $50. Well, that's a lot of money to sink into something for a one-off, so you might be better off getting the bundle that inevitably comes out, or wait until this one goes on sale and get both, because getting the vanilla version of the game, while it might be a bit easier to get into, it does have those performance problems and everything still that this version doesn't, and this kind of makes it just this is the superior version of the game. So why would you get the inferior version at this point instead if you've never tried it before? So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. It's fantastic so far. I'm enjoying every second of it. It's a huge improvement. However, I would like to see the vanilla version get some of these improvements, even if it's only on the performance level, because that's kind of stupid that they haven't bothered doing that. If you've played it, let me know your thoughts on it. If you have any questions about it, leave them in the comments or ask me on Twitter or on my Discord server. I am PattyJack. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.